It's a good thing Michael was there to really seal the deal. He's got a natural knack for this, doesn't he? Real business sense. The words hung in the air, thick with a casual arrogance that felt like a physical blow. I stared at the polished oak of my boss's desk, my gaze unfocused, my mind a sudden, terrifying blank. Across from me sat Robert, my boss, a man I'd worked under for 10 years of late nights, sacrificed weekends, and a quiet, persistent belief that hard work, ingenuity, and loyalty would eventually be recognized. Robert's son, Michael, a man barely out of his 20s with a permanent smirk etched onto his face, was perched on the edge of the chair opposite me, radiating an almost palpable sense of smug entitlement. He'd spent the last 3 months in my shadow, a silent observer to my painstaking efforts. My life before this moment had been a carefully constructed edifice of routine and ambition. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a sensible car, and poured every ounce of my energy into my career. My family life was complicated. My parents had always favored my older brother, a constant comparison that had bred a deep-seated insecurity in me, a need to prove myself, to earn my worth. Robert had always seemed like a different kind of figure, a mentor, someone who valued substance over superficiality. That illusion shattered with those few careless words. The deal, the one I'd nurtured from a whisper of an idea into a concrete, million-dollar agreement, the one that was supposed to redefine my future and finally give me the recognition I craved, had just been handed to his son. And not just handed, but, with a casual dismissal that implied my contribution was incidental. The red flags had been there, of course. Little things, insidious whispers in the grand opera of my professional life. Like the time I'd spent weeks researching a competitor's weakness, uncovering a crucial vulnerability that directly led to a pivot in our strategy. I'd meticulously compiled the report, spent hours with the marketing team refining the presentation, and when it was finally delivered, Robert had beamed, slapping me on the back and saying, "Excellent work, you really nailed that one." Then, the following Monday, at the all-hands meeting, he'd presented the same findings, attributing the breakthrough to a keen observation by Michael. Michael, who had been on vacation in Bali during the entire research phase. I'd bitten my tongue, the familiar sting of injustice a dull ache in my chest, telling myself it was a misunderstanding, a slip of the tongue. Then there was the client meeting where I'd outlined the core strategy for the acquisition. I'd spent months building rapport, understanding their needs, anticipating their concerns. During the meeting, Robert had interjected, taking over the most critical points, framing them as his own insights. Later, he'd praised my supportive role, while Michael, who had been present purely for networking purposes, received a hearty, "Great job bringing that strategic vision to the table, son." I'd started keeping notes, small, discrete records of my achievements, the ideas originated, the client relationships nurtured. It was a quiet act of self-preservation, a way to anchor myself against the subtle erosion of my credit. The absolute worst was the proposal for the Northwood account. This wasn't just any client, it was a behemoth, a company that had resisted every sales pitch for years. I'd cracked their code. I'd spent 6 months dissecting their annual reports, attending their industry conferences incognito, and building a personal connection with their VP of operations through shared hobbies. I presented a phased approach, a multi-year partnership that offered them unprecedented value. Robert had been hesitant at first, citing the complexity, the risk. But I'd persisted, armed with data, with testimonials, with an unwavering belief in the soundness of my plan. He'd finally relented, giving me the green light to pursue it exclusively. For weeks, my entire life revolved around this deal. I was living on coffee and sheer willpower, pushing my own boundaries. I secured meetings, navigated internal politics, and fended off competing interests. I finally secured a preliminary agreement, a handshake with the CEO, a clear path to a signed contract. And then came the meeting in Robert's office, the one that felt like a slow-motion train wreck. The air in Robert's office was usually thick with the scent of expensive leather and stale ambition. Today, it felt suffocating. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, slicing the room into sharp stripes of light and shadow, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat on the edge of the plush client chair, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. Robert sat behind his imposing desk, a faint smile playing on his lips. Beside him, Michael, looking impossibly relaxed, lounged in a chair, his expensive watch GL. Inting. The preliminary agreement lay on the desk between them, a testament to my months of relentless effort. So, Robert began, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. Michael and I were just discussing the Northwood proposal. Quite brilliant, really. My stomach clenched. The proposal? I thought we were finalizing the terms. Michael leaned forward, a smirk widening. Dad's been mentoring me, you know. Helping me understand the bigger picture. And this deal, it's right up my alley. Got that long-term strategic thinking he loves. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. But I developed this. I've been working on this for months. My voice was a little higher than I intended, a betraying tremor running through it. Robert chuckled, a dismissive sound. Of course, you did. You laid the groundwork. Excellent groundwork, truly. But Michael, he really put the finishing touches on it. Saw the potential, the synergy. He's got a real eye for this kind of thing. He gestured to Michael. He's the one who really convinced Northwood we were the right partners. His fresh perspective, you know. Really resonated. Michael chimed in, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. It was a collaborative effort, of course. But I think my ideas really brought it to the next level. Dad says I have his business acumen. The words hit me like a physical blow. My meticulously crafted strategies, my sleepless nights, my personal sacrifices, all reduced to groundwork. My contribution was an afterthought, a stepping stone for Michael's supposed genius. I looked at Robert, searching his eyes for any flicker of recognition, any sign that he understood the magnitude of what he was doing. There was none. Only a self-satisfied paternal pride and a blatant disregard for my decade of service. The air crackled with unspoken truths, with the blatant theft of my hard-won success. In that moment, the carefully constructed facade of respect and mentorship crumbled, leaving behind the stark reality of a man who would sacrifice anything, anyone, for his son. The finality of it settled over me, not with anger, but with a profound, icy stillness. The stunned silence that followed Robert's pronouncement was deafening. Michael preened, basking in the undeserved glory. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a desperate urge to scream, to rage, to demand an explanation that would never come. But a deeper instinct, honed by years of navigating subtle power dynamics and hidden resentments, took over. My mind, which had momentarily frozen, now worked with a chilling clarity. I didn't need to beg, to argue, to make a scene. Those were the tactics of the weak, the desperate. I needed something more decisive, more permanent. I stood up, my movements deliberate, almost unnervingly calm. The preliminary agreement, the symbol of my stolen victory, lay before me. I reached out, my fingers brushing its smooth surface. I understand, I said, my voice low and steady, devoid of emotion. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He'd expected tears, or anger, or at least a plea. You do? He asked, a hint of suspicion creeping in. Yes, I replied, my gaze meeting his directly. I understand that my role in this project, and indeed, my role in this company, has been redefined. I didn't pick up the agreement. Instead, I turned and walked towards the door, my back straight, my steps measured. As I reached the threshold, I paused, not turning around. There's one more thing you should know, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. The confidentiality clauses for the Northwood deal. I drafted those myself, remember? Every detail, every contingency. And the termination clause, it's quite specific about material misrepresentation of project leadership. I didn't wait for a response. I opened the door and walked out, leaving them in the silence of their ill-gotten gains. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest, but my mind was sharp, focused. The following days were a blur of calculated actions. I didn't resign. I didn't confront them further. Instead, I meticulously reviewed every document related to the Northwood deal, every email, every contract amendment, every signed addendum. I found it. A small, almost insignificant amendment signed by Robert a week prior, granting Michael the official title of lead project manager for Northwood, with a clause that stated any misrepresentation of the project lead's authority or contribution would render the agreement null and void. It was buried deep, an oversight born of Robert's arrogance and Michael's eagerness to be seen as the heir apparent. I then did something I had never done before. I contacted the CEO of Northwood directly, bypassing Robert entirely. I requested a brief, private meeting, citing a clarification on contractual details. In that meeting, I presented the amendment, not as a weapon, but as a point of necessary clarification. I explained, calmly and fully, how the leadership role had been misrepresented to me, and how, under the terms of the agreement itself, this constituted a material breach. I didn't plead or accuse. I simply laid out the facts, the undeniable evidence of Robert's deception and Michael's complicity. The CEO of Northwood, a shrewd businesswoman who valued integrity above all else, listened intently. She asked a few pointed questions, her gaze sharp and discerning. When I finished, she simply nodded. The fallout was swift and brutal. Robert and Michael received a terse email from Northwood, stating that due to unforeseen contractual discrepancies and a lack of clear, established leadership, they were rescinding their preliminary agreement and moving forward with a more transparent partner. My phone began to blow up almost immediately. Robert's texts were a furious storm of accusations and threats. Michael's were a pathetic mix of disbelief and panic. Then came the calls from other family members, Robert's siblings, who had always been quick to praise his success, now eager to cast judgment on his downfall. They called me heartless, disloyal, a snake in the grass. They couldn't comprehend that I had simply held him accountable for his own actions. I didn't respond to any of them. I simply continued with my work, completing the remaining tasks for other clients, ensuring my own professional reputation remained spotless. Robert, stripped of his prize and exposed as a fraud, became a pariah within his own industry. His reputation, once so carefully cultivated, was shattered. He had traded his integrity for a fleeting moment of paternal pride, and the cost was absolute. Michael, forced to confront the reality of his own inadequacy, disappeared from the company soon after, a disgraced prodigal son. Standing in my quiet apartment that evening, the city lights twinkling outside my window, I felt a profound sense of peace. It wasn't the explosive satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet, grounded closure of justice. My ambition had been redirected, my loyalty tested and ultimately rewarded by my own integrity. The $3.6 million deal had been a casualty, but the far greater prize, my self-respect and the restoration of balance, was mine. The silence that followed was not empty, but full, a testament to a battle fought and won with a quiet, unwavering resolve.